everybody, and welcome to the Historical Sew-Along series, where we'll take you through the ins and outs of some simple historical sewing projects to build up your wardrobe and your hand skills. Maybe even both at the same time. From prep work to finished product, we'll do it together, following step-by-step instructions with some tips and tricks sprinkled in along the way. This series is meant for all skill levels, but it is especially nice for beginners to build confidence while building a solid toolkit of techniques. With all of that said, feel free to pause, rewind, rewatch, and fast forward to whichever parts you need as many times as necessary. So let's get to the good stuff.
Hello everyone, Christina here with Burnley and Trowbridge, and welcome back to our final installment in our CAP Sew-Along series. This is video number 3, so if you missed videos 1 and 2, go ahead and use the links below to get caught up. You should have cut out your cap pieces, done some hemming to finish those edges off, and in today's video, we're going to be putting everything together. Go ahead and grab your pieces. You'll need your caul, your band, and your ruffle, and let's get started. Let's go ahead and start with our caul. The first thing that we're going to do is take either a string or a cord. In my case, I'm actually using our 1/8" plain woven cotton tape. So it's just really narrow, and we're going to actually run that through the casing that we made in our last segment. To do that, I have a bodkin. Yes, I have a bodkin. I'm going to go ahead and run my tape through my bodkin, and then I'm going to very gently run my bodkin through the channel. Coming out of the eyelet. There we go. Once you've worked your tape through your casing, like you see that I've done here, you want to leave a little bit sticking out on either end, and make sure you have enough to adjust the casing on the back to draw that in, or let it out with enough to tie as well. So I'm going to go ahead and snip off this little bit of extra right there. And before we do anything else with our caul, we need to be sure that we anchor those tapes down to the edge so that they're going to hold nice and tightly for when you adjust your cap later. I'm going to use my linen thread to take a couple of stitches in place through the tape and the casing. I am doing this on the inside as well. This is going to really get folded into the hem, but it's safer to take these stitches on the interior in case you don't catch all of it. Once you've anchored your tapes inside of your casing, we're going to go ahead and finish that raw edge left on the caul. To do so, grab your pattern piece, and you can see, depending on which cap style you're making, you'll want to actually begin the bulk of your gathering right at that little arrow on the pattern. So for cap A, you're going to start here. For cap B, you're going to start there, which means this first portion of the cap can just be hemmed either using a rolled hem, or you could, if you're more comfortable, use the folding hem that we showed you in the last video. When we're gathering a large amount of fabric down into a smaller flat piece of fabric, you might remember doing this for the apron sew-along. We're going to want to mark on our caul our halfway point, and then we're also going to want to mark our cap A or cap B point. You can do this with a pin, which is what I'm going to use today. You could also do this with a basting stitch in a contrasting color. I'm making the lappet style. I'm going to go ahead and use the cap A arrow. Now at this point you could start hemming, but I like to use one other reference point to help keep my gathers nice and even in the caul. So what I'm actually going to do is take my caul and fold it until my pins meet, and then I'm going to run my edges together because there is a curve there. I'm going to find the halfway point between my two pins. I'm going to mark that. So if I do that to my other side to match those pins, I should now have a caul that's divided into 6 sections. 2 of those sections will be left ungathered, and then the remaining 4 sections are what we'll be gathering today. I do recommend using a fresh thread for each section. That will allow you to space your whip gathers or to pull them closer together a little more easily without worrying about breaking a thread and having all of your hard work come undone. So I'll be cutting 4 different lengths of thread to whip gather these 4 different sections down. Right, so as you can see, I have gone ahead and hemmed the lower portion up to that point on our pattern piece that we just talked about. And I've just done that with a flat hem. So I folded it, basted it, and folded it again, just like we did on our band, just like we did on our ruffle hem. So now, though, I'm going to transition from that flat hem into a rolled whip gather. And remember, just like I said earlier, we do have that tutorial if you want more kind of up close and personal instruction on how to do a rolled whip gather. Now to make that transition, I'm going to go ahead and pull my fabric a little bit taut. Use my thumb, and I'm actually using my ring finger, as you can see, to go from a fold into a roll. I'm just going to continue to do that the whole way around as I roll whip gather. All right, so you can see I finished my rolled whip gather. And now I know in the rolled whip gather tutorial, we recommend not to use this technique typically on the bias. That's because it can be a little fiddly on the bias, so just go ahead and work with it. But obviously on the caul, most of that curve of the caul is on the bias, and we do suggest still using this technique in this application. Now I have my little extra strings from my 4 sections, and I've gathered them down a little bit as I've been stitching because it's a little easier that way. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my band, and you can see I've actually marked where my arrows were from my pattern, those little notches, and then I've quartered my band as well. I'm going to match those quarters up to the quarters on my cap, adjust the gathers, pretty much just like we did with our aprons. If you look back to the apron sew along, this is that same kind of divide and conquer technique. And then we'll come back together and I'll show you how to stitch these up. Okay, so you can see this section. I have gathered my caul down to the length of the band, and I have pinned them in place, and they are just where the edges are kind of butted to each other and even. And this is also in our rolled whip gather tutorial. I know I keep referencing that video, but there's a lot of really good stuff in there for this technique of utilizing the rolled whip gather and then attaching things that have been rolled whip gather. So I'm just gonna give a very quick kind of walkthrough of what this looks like. We're going to catch just the edge, that top edge of our folded hem of the band, and we're gonna go right through the peak of that whip gather. And then we'll do exactly the same thing for the next one, catching just the fold and the peak of that whip gather. And if white on white is a little difficult for you to see here, the tutorial actually, I think, uses a different color thread. I think it's using black on white just to help you illustrate that. Since this is a cap that I'm going to be hopefully wearing, I didn't want to stitch it in black. All right, and I'm just going to continue this process until the whole rest of the caul is attached to the band. I probably should mention that this is happening right sides together. So you are putting the right side of the band to the right side of the caul, and you're doing that whip stitch through the inside. So for the ruffle, you are going to do essentially the same thing that we did with the caul, where we're going to do a rolled whip gather. And Angela was really awesome and did my rolled whip gather for my ruffle for me because I was running out of time to get it done for the video. Caps are a lot of sewing. So thank you, Angela. And before we put that on, we're going to want to do that same idea of having and quartering our cap band. Now, if you're doing the curved band, you can just kind of mark those quarters by folding. If you have the lappet style, you're going to want to be a little more careful about figuring out where to distribute that ruffle. And you can do it the same way that we did a little earlier by just walking that edge along until you find the fold. So it can be a little deceptive because it's going to make that turn at the bottom of the lappet. Then we'll take right sides together just like we did with the caul and the band. Ease it around the corners if you are doing the lappet style. If you're doing the other style band, it should work its way around that curve pretty nicely for you. And so you can see my gathers here are just a little tighter than we want them to be. They're a little short of my pin, so I'm just going to loosen them a little bit to space them out. Angela made tiny whip gathers. And again, this is why I do recommend leaving the thread in sections, because if I were to try to space this out over the whole length of the ruffle, it could be a little bit more difficult. Once you've spaced them out, go ahead and pin in place, and then we'll do the exact same thing that we did with the caul, where we'll whip those together, catching the top edge of that fold and the peak of the ruffle. But Christina, you say, I don't want to gather my ruffle, I want to pleat my ruffle. Well, we can do that too. With pleating, I would say dividing and conquering isn't quite as easy of a way to do it on this particular style because, well, honestly, it can be a little tricky to do some of that math. Figuring out pleats, especially when there are spaces between the pleats, can be a little tricky. And honestly, it doesn't seem like that's what they're doing in the 18th century. The tops of the pleats appear to be evenly spaced, at least to the eye, but we often see the depth of the pleat not necessarily being the same for each pleat, which suggests that they're not using a complicated mathematical formula to do that. They're probably just pleating it by how it looks. So to make that happen, you have your hemmed length of ruffle, and you're just going to want to start at the end of your band, whether it's the curved band or the lappet style. And I like to pleat it side by side so I can get an idea of how it looks, but ultimately you can just start to pleat, pin those pleats down, You can see the pleats there. They look pretty evenly spaced. They don't have to be perfect. Now you could decide to leave the pins in and you could attach your pleats this way. I don't like working around the pins when I'm trying to fiddle with that whip stitching on the interior. So what I actually like to do is I prefer to take just a small basting stitch, really like a tacking stitch at the top of each pleat, just to hold it in place. It is important when you are deciding to pleat your ruffle that all of the edges of that pleat are level at the top, because when it comes time to whip your ruffle to your band, you don't want to miss any of the parts of that and have those pleats get a little wonky on you. So you can see I've tacked down each pleat at the top of the pleat. That's going to make this really nice and easy to lay against my cap band, just like we would if we were doing a rolled whip gather. And instead of whipping through the peaks of the ruffle and the top of the fold, you're just going to whip through the top of both folds. So the fold on your band and the fold on your ruffle. Be sure when you get to the thickness of those pleats that you are catching the tops of each layer of the pleat in that stitch. And you can see once we open that up and flatten it out, we have a nice attached pleat to our band. Once our ruffle is attached to our band and our caul has been attached to our band, we are done with our cap. Yay! That means we're also done with this sew along. All right, so I am not actually going to show you my finished cap today because we're going to save the reveal of the gathered cotton muslin cap until our next video, which is actually going to be a cap hack, and that will debut 2 weeks from today, so be ready for that. I know Angela talked about that a little bit in our live. We hope you're excited for it, and you will see the finished cap in that segment. So friends, thank you again for joining us. We always appreciate having you spend time with us, even if it's just digitally for now. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you get notifications when new videos premiere or when we go live with special events with Angela or Brooke or myself. In the meantime, enjoy wearing all of the wonderful things that you've created with us in your sew along journey. And while we might not see you soon in person, we hope to see you soon here on our channel. As a very wise Tigger once said, ta-ta for now.